Her ex left bruises, so the Mafia boss left a trail of graves. In return, Maria wore long sleeves in the humid August swelter. At the diner, the cuffs of her uniform were damp with sweat, but she never rolled them up, not even when the air conditioning sputtered and died, and the smell of stale coffee and bleach grew thick enough to taste. "You cold, sweetie?" a trucker asked, eyeing her sleeves. Maria forced a smile that felt like cracking porcelain. Just a chill. She managed her tables with a practiced economy of movement, her body a map of careful angles. She never reached across a table with her left arm. She held the heavy, oval trays high, balancing them against her shoulder, because the grip sent a sharp, specific pain up her wrist from the 2 fingers he had bent back. The charm always came first. On Sunday, he made her pancakes, kissing the crown of her head, his voice a low rumble about their future. On Monday, he asked where the $50 from her tips went. The question was soft. The back of his hand was not. He apologized afterward, his tears hotter than hers. He held her, rocking her, whispering that he just loved her so much, that he just got so scared of losing her. And she, steeped in shame, had whispered it was okay. She hid the injuries. The split lip was a cold sore. The darkening stain on her cheekbone was a fall in the shower. Her coworkers at the diner, women who knew the look, stopped asking. They just poured her coffee a little stronger and slipped her an extra slice of pie to take home. On this night, a Tuesday, he was charming again. He'd brought home a cheap bottle of wine and insisted they watch a movie. His arm was heavy around her shoulders, his thumb rubbing her collarbone. Maria sat rigid, smiling until her face ached, her entire nervous system screaming. She knew this part of the cycle. The tenderness was just the tightening of the spring. He fell asleep around 11, breathing heavily, his hand still gripping her arm. She waited. 1 hour? 2. At 1 in the morning, she slid inch by inch from beneath his arm. The deadbolt on their apartment door was loud. The snick of it retracting sounded like a gunshot in the silence. She froze. He only grunted and rolled over. Maria didn't pack a suitcase. She grabbed a thin duffel bag from the back of the closet. She took the $88 from the pickle jar, her spare diner uniform, and a small porcelain bird her grandmother had given her. Nothing else. No photos, no keepsakes, just the bird and the cash. She crept down the hall to the elevator, her heart hammering against the ribs he hadn't bruised yet. She pressed the button. The silence of the hallway was deafening. Her phone vibrated. A text from Sasha, her old friend from high school. He's still there. Maria's thumb shook so badly she could barely type. She called instead, whispering into the receiver. "Sasha, I'm leaving. I'm doing it now." Silence on the other end. Then a sharp inhale. "Maria, oh God, okay, you can have the couch. Honey, you know you can. But just for a night, you understand? He knows where I live. He'll come here. I know, I just need a bus ticket. Okay, hurry, be safe." The line clicked dead. The elevator dinged on the floor below her. It was rising. A cold dread, sharper than any bruise, seized her. The elevator was for residents, only 2 people on this floor, her and... She heard it. The jangling of his keys, the heavy tread down the hall. He wasn't at work. He'd never left. He'd been testing her. Maria bolted. She ignored the elevator and threw her shoulder against the heavy metal door to the stairwell. She didn't run down. She half fell, catching the railing, her sneakers skipping steps. She hit the lobby and didn't look at the doorman, sprinting past him and into the humid midnight street. "Maria!" His voice echoed from the doorway, thick with rage. "You get back here!" She ran. She cut between 2 parked cars and into the alley that ran behind their building. It serviced the kitchens of the bar on the ground floor. A white delivery van was parked by the dumpsters, its back door open. The driver was visible in the cab, illuminated by his phone, arguing loudly. Maria didn't think. She climbed into the back of the van, pulling her duffel bag in, and crawled behind crates of lettuce and boxes of napkins. She pulled a dirty tarp over herself. She heard his footsteps on the pavement. "I saw you, Maria." You think you can hide from me?" The driver in the cab finished his call, cursed, and slammed his door. Maria held her breath. The van's engine rumbled to life. The back doors slammed shut, pitching her into absolute, suffocating darkness. The van lurched forward. She lay there, smelling diesel and rotting iceberg lettuce, and cried silently as the vehicle pulled onto the highway, leaving the only life she knew behind. She must have passed out. When the van finally stopped and the doors opened, gray dawn light flooded the compartment. The driver, a man in his 50s, stared at her. "The hell?" Maria scrambled out, tumbling onto the pavement. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I needed—" He just looked at her face, at the old yellow bruise and the new red mark, and sighed. "Get out of here, kid. I didn't see nothing." She was in a part of the city she didn't recognize. The buildings were brick, old, with fire escapes zigzagging down their faces. It was run down, but not derelict. There was a bakery emitting the smell of fresh bread, a butcher shop, a small market. And in the center of the block, holding it all together, was a restaurant, Romano's. Unlike the other storefronts, its brass was polished. The windows were spotless. Through the glass, she could see white tablecloths and dark wood. 2 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits stood near the entrance. They weren't bouncers. They were watching. They watched the street, the cars, the woman buying oranges at the market. They saw Maria, and their eyes lingered, assessing, before dismissing her. A black sedan, the kind that cost more than a house, pulled up. The men straightened. A man exited Romano's. He was tall, dressed in a black suit with no tie, his white shirt buttoned to the collar. He couldn't have been older than mid-30s, but he moved with an absolute, unnerving stillness. He didn't look at the street, but the street quieted for him. The baker, wiping his hands on his apron, gave a short, respectful nod. The men in suits opened the car door. The man paused, glanced at the bakery, and then his eyes, dark, unreadable, swept the block. Maria felt the weight of his gaze even from 50 yards away. People lowered their heads. He got in the car, and it pulled away, silent as a shark. The adrenaline that had kept Maria moving for 12 hours evaporated. The pain, which had been a dull roar, became a screaming fire. Her ribs ached, her wrist throbbed. The $88 felt like useless paper. She was alone. She was marked. She was hunted. She stumbled into an alley between the bakery and a closed laundromat, sinking down behind a stack of empty crates. The trembling started, a full-body convulsion she couldn't stop. She curled into a ball, buried her face in her knees, and waited for the world to end. Luca Romano did not like surprises. He liked his ledgers balanced, his kitchens clean, and his neighborhood quiet. He was doing a final walkthrough of the restaurant's back alley, checking the locks himself, a habit from poorer days. When he heard the sound, it was a whimper, thin and animal. Sal, his driver, waited by the sedan. "Boss, something wrong?" Luca ignored him. He stepped past the dumpsters, his polished shoes silent on the cracked pavement, under the single, flickering street lamp. He saw her, a bundle of dirty clothes and dark hair. She was curled up, bleeding from a fresh split in her lip. Her diner uniform was torn at the shoulder. He saw this, clinically. But then he saw the marks on her throat, the distinct finger-shaped bruises. Something unfamiliar shifted in his chest. It wasn't pity. Pity was useless. It was a cold, territorial anger. This was his block. This kind of mess was not permitted. "Sal," Luca said, his voice low and calm. "Get her up." Sal moved, hooking his arms under hers. She cried out, a thin, terrified sound. "Sir, we call the police?" Sal asked. Luca looked at the bruises again. He knew what police did. They took a report. They asked questions. And then they sent women like this right back to the man who did it. "No police," Luca said. He slipped off his heavy wool suit jacket. "The house on Vine Street." He draped the jacket over her shaking shoulders. She flinched, hard, as if expecting a blow. He kept his hands slow, visible. The jacket swallowed her. He handed Sal a thick fold of cash. "Call Mrs. Bianco. Tell her to open the kitchen. I want broth, bread, and a robe, now." Maria woke up in a bed, not a couch, a bed with sheets so soft they felt like water. The room was simple, clean, painted a soft gray. There was a dresser and a locked door. A man was standing near that door, the man from the black car. She scrambled backward, pulling the sheets up, her heart leaping into her throat. "Easy," he said. His voice was quiet, with a rough edge, like stones settling. "You're safe." "Where am I? Who are you?" Her voice was a croak. "My name is Luca. This is a safe place. You were in the alley." He didn't move closer. He respected the space. On the dresser, she saw folded clothes, gray sweatpants, a thick black t-shirt. There was a glass of water. I don't have any money," she whispered, the old, familiar shame washing over her. "I'm not asking for money," he said, his tone steady. There was a knock. An older man with a medical bag and the smell of whiskey on his breath entered. "Mr. Romano, this is her?" "Dr. Alessi," Luca said. "Check her ribs." Maria flinched, but the doctor was practiced. "Just breathe. Kara, let's see." His hands were gentle but firm. "Two are cracked, not broken. You were lucky." He applied a salve to her lip and taped her ribs tightly. He worked as if she were a piece of furniture, but his touch was not unkind. He finished, nodded to Luca, and left. Luca stepped forward then. Just one step. Maria's hands were clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. She kept her eyes fixed on the wall just past his shoulder. He picked up the glass of water. He didn't hand it to her. He placed it, slowly, on the nightstand. "You should drink," he said. She didn't move. He hesitated. Then, very slowly, he raised one hand. She flinched, squeezing her eyes shut. His hand landed on her shoulder. It was just weight, not a strike, not a caress, just a heavy, steady pressure. "No one will touch you here," he said. "You have my word." He left, closing the door softly behind him. She stared at the door for an hour before she finally reached for the water. She stayed in the gray room for 3 days. Mrs. Bianco, a stern woman who never spoke, brought her trays of food, broth, pasta, soft bread. Maria ate. She slept. Luca had given her a simple burner phone. "For emergencies," he'd said. On the 3rd day, it buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. It was from Sasha. "M. He was here. He was at my apartment. He broke the door. He tore my place apart. He knows you ran. He said he'll find you. He said you're his property. M. I'm scared. I'm going to my sister's. Be safe." The phone slipped from her fingers. The room, which had felt safe, suddenly felt like a trap. Luca found her an hour later, sitting on the floor, phone in her lap. He was reading a heavy ledger in the safe house kitchen when he heard the sharp intake of her breath. He didn't ask what was wrong. He bent down, picked up the phone, and read the message. His face, usually so composed, went utterly blank. The stillness that had unnerved Maria on the street returned, but this time it felt different. It felt cold. The protective instinct he'd felt in the alley hardened into something precise and lethal. He made a call. Sal, the name of the man who did this to her, the one who went to her friend's apartment. "I want it by noon." He hung up. He looked at Maria, who was staring at him, terrified. "This will stop," he said. It was not a reassurance. It was a statement of fact. He made a second call, his voice even lower. "I need a message delivered. Find out where he drinks. I want 2 men there. Let his friends know the girl is under Romano protection. If they help him, if they even speak to him, they answer to me." That night, the trauma surfaced. Maria woke up, choking, the broth, the bread, it all came up. She made it to the bathroom, collapsing by the toilet, dry heaving. But it wasn't the food she was vomiting. It was the memories. The sound of his keys in the lock. The smell of his whiskey sweat. The weight of his hand. She didn't hear Luca enter. The house had been silent. He was just there, kneeling on the cold tile beside her. He didn't speak. He took a washcloth, ran it under the cold tap, and handed it to her. She was shaking. A deep, seismic tremor that started in her stomach and radiated out. She couldn't stop it. "I'm sorry," she wept. "I'm sorry, I'm making a mess." "Be quiet," he said. But his voice was not harsh. He watched her shake. Then, gently, He brushed a damp strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was light. She tried to pull the washcloth back to her face, but her hand was shaking too violently. He caught her wrist. His grip was strong, encircling the small bones, and he didn't let go. He just held her steady, cradling her. The pressure anchored her. The shaking began to subside, and then a sound ripped out of her throat, a single, involuntary sob that she had held back for a year. It was the sound of the final part of her breaking. Luca didn't pull away. He didn't pat her back. He leaned in, slowly, and pressed his forehead against her temple. His skin was warm. It wasn't sexual. It was intimate. It was the simple, profound statement of, "I am here." Her breath hitched, stopped, and then started again, evening out. She opened her eyes. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the hard lines of his mouth. He was a dangerous man, she knew it. But the world had been violent, and everyone had left. He stayed. The next morning, she drank coffee in the kitchen. He sat across from her. "He will not find you here," Luca said, "but you cannot stay in that room forever. You can stay in this house while you plan your next step. You will be protected." Maria looked at his hands, resting on the table. They were the hands that had steadied her. They were the hands that had, she was certain, ordered violence on her behalf. She thought of the alley. She thought of Sasha's text. She had nowhere else to go. "Okay," she whispered. She began to see him not as a simple menace, but as a complicated guardian. The gratitude she felt was heavy. It was tangled with a deep, cold fear. She was indebted to a man who ruled a world she didn't understand. A few days later, he insisted she walk outside. "You need the air," he said. He walked beside her, Sal following 10 paces behind. The neighborhood was different with him. The baker saw them. "Mr. Romano." He nodded, then looked at Maria. He looked at the healing bruise on her face, looked at Luca, and then quickly looked away, handing Luca a warm loaf of bread. A woman pulling a shopping cart crossed the street to avoid them. A small child, chasing a red ball, saw Luca and stopped cold. The boy grabbed his ball and hid behind a fruit stand, peering out with wide eyes. His mother rushed over, grabbed his arm, and pulled him inside, whispering angrily. Maria felt a chill. This was the price of safety. The community watched. They knew the rules. Luca's presence was a wall, and the fear he generated was the mortar. She was safe, she realized, because she was his, and she was just beginning to understand what that meant. The safe house was a clean, gray cage, but it was not her life. Maria learned the rules of Luca's world in small, quiet snapshots. His inner circle was small, built on history rather than fear. There was Nico, his lieutenant, a man who moved with the sharp, precise energy of a scalpel. He organized the routes, the payments, the messages. He looked at Maria not with malice, but with a cold assessment, as if she were a volatile explosive added to a stable equation. Then there was Angelo, the head cook at Romano's, a man with flour in his gray hair and sadness in his eyes. He remembered Luca as a boy. "Luciano," he'd said to Maria one afternoon, pushing a plate of fresh cannoli toward her in the restaurant's kitchen. He was always dragging things home, birds with broken wings, stray cats, his mother. She despaired. "We have no food. Luciano," she'd say, and he'd say, "Then I will find some." Angelo smiled, a sad, distant expression. "He's a good man. He just learned to protect what mattered to him in a hard way." And there was Elena, a nurse who moonlighted for Luca's organization. She came to the safe house to check Maria's ribs, her touch far more practiced than the drunken doctor's. "He pays well," Elena said, wrapping Maria's torso with fresh bandages. "Usually, it's men. Stupid arguments, broken hands, sometimes a bullet graze. You," she said, looking at Maria's face, "you're different. He's never asked me to make a house call for someone. Lost." Elena's gaze softened. "He seems worried. I've never seen him worried." Each person was a different facet of the man who held her. Nico was his blade. Angelo was his memory. Elena was his quiet, practical mercy. It softened the image of the man who had ordered violence, painting him as something more complex than a monster. Maria saw Luca mostly at night. He would return to the safe house, his suit smelling faintly of cigar smoke and the cold night air, and they would sit in the kitchen, not speaking, just sharing the silence. One night, she finally asked the question that sat heavy on her ribs. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. "Why this life? Why protect me?" Luca was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee. "My father," he said, his voice flat, "used his hands for two things, breaking bottles and breaking my mother." Maria's breath caught. "I was 10 years old," Luca continued, his eyes distant, fixed on a memory she couldn't see. "He'd been drinking for 3 days. He hit her, and she fell, and she didn't get up right away. I grabbed a kitchen knife. I told him I'd kill him." He paused, a muscle working in his jaw. "He just laughed. He took the knife from me. But he stopped hitting her. He stopped for a whole week." He looked at Maria, his gaze intense, devoid of self-pity. "I learned very young that the law doesn't come into houses like mine. Maria, the police don't stop men like that. The only thing that stops a man who uses his fists is a man who is willing to use them harder. Loyalty is the only law that ever kept anyone safe. He put his hands on you, so I put my hands on him." He was not endorsing his violence. He was merely explaining it. It was a code, loyalty above law, and she, terrified and broken, found a dark, unsettling part of herself understanding him. The physical healing was slow. The cracked ribs made it hard to breathe, but it was the tremor in her hands that wouldn't stop. The sound of a door closing too fast. A voice raised in the street. It sent her back to the apartment floor, cowering. Luca noticed. "You're still flinching when I pour coffee," and he said one morning. "You need to talk to someone." "I'm not talking to a state shrink," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "They'll ask questions. They'll send me back." "You're not," he said. "You're going to the Apertura Community Clinic. It's a counseling center. We support it." The clinic was discreet, located in the basement of a church. The waiting room had pale green walls and magazines that were 2 years old. Maria went into an office with a kind-faced woman. Luca stayed outside. He looked impossibly large in the small plastic chair, a man of lethal stillness forced into mundane waiting. He picked up a magazine, stared at it, and put it down. A man entered the clinic, his eyes lingering on Maria's back as she waited. He stared, his gaze oily and assessing. Luca didn't look up from his magazine. "Keep walking," he said, his voice a low, quiet rumble. The man startled, his eyes snapping to Luca. He paled and hurried down the hall. When Maria came out an hour later, her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. The act of speaking the truth aloud had drained her. She stumbled slightly. Luca stood instantly. He put a steadying hand on her knee, a simple, grounding touch. "You're okay," he said. As they walked to the exit, the man from the waiting room was standing near the door, pretending to read a flyer. Luca's arm moved, settling at the small of Maria's back. It wasn't possessive. It was a sweep, a protective gesture that guided her past the man and out the door, shielding her with his own body. Maria felt the warmth of his palm through her shirt. It was the first time a man had touched her in public to shield her, not to brand her. It was a new kind of touch, steady, non-threatening, and it sent a strange, warming pulse through her. That night, she couldn't sleep. The safe house, which had been a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. She needed air. She found the stairs to the roof and pushed the heavy door open. The city skyline glittered, a field of distant, indifferent diamonds. She stood by the ledge, letting the wind pull at her hair. Couldn't sleep either, she jumped. But it was only Luca. He walked over, standing beside her, separated by a few feet of respectful silence. "I own half this block," he said, not as a boast, but as a confession. 2 restaurants, the apartments on Vine, the bakery. I have influence. I have power. And most nights, I feel completely hollow, empty." And he looked at her. "It's all just moving pieces, until you—" Maria looked down at her hands. "I used to dream of just being invisible. I'd walk to the diner and pray that he wouldn't see me, that nobody would see the bruises. Now, I am invisible, and I've never been more terrified. They exchanged stories in the vulnerable quiet of 3 a.m. She told him about the small porcelain bird her grandmother gave her, the only thing she'd packed. He told her about his first real job, sweeping floors at Angelo's bakery, and how he used to steal day-old bread for his mother. The air between them shifted. The space of 3 feet felt charged. "Your hands are shaking," he said. "They're always shaking." He reached out, his hand open. "May I?" She stared at his hand. It was the hand that had ordered violence, the hand that had steadied her in the bathroom. She hesitated, then slowly, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, warm. He didn't just hold it, he laced their fingers together. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a slow, calming rhythm. He turned her hand over, his gaze tracing the lines on her palm. Then he bent his head and pressed a soft, reverent kiss to the center of her palm. Her breath hitched. She met his eyes. He was watching her, his expression raw, open. He leaned in, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. He kissed her. It was long and impossibly soft. It was not a kiss of hunger or possession. It was a kiss of healing. His mouth was gentle, his other hand coming up to cup her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek. Her hands found his chest, gripping the fabric of his shirt. He pulled back just enough to press his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cold air. Maria trembled. It was a different kind of tremor, not of fear, but of release. The tension she had held in her body for a year finally broke. She sagged against him, and his arms came around her, holding her securely. He didn't try for more. He just held her on the rooftop, under the light of 1,000 distant windows. The next day, the sweet afterglow of the rooftop kiss shattered. Luca had taken her to Romano's for lunch. It was her first time in the dining room, a quiet back booth. She felt almost normal. Then Nico entered, his face granite. "Boss, you need to see this. Outside." Luca was on his feet instantly. He put a hand on Maria's arm. "Stay here." But she followed him. She had to. The large, beautiful mural of an Italian vineyard on the restaurant's side wall was destroyed. Vicious slashes of red spray paint covered the grapes and hills. And in the center, nailed to the brick, was a single cheap, black high heel, the kind a waitress wore. Maria's blood ran cold. "It's him," she whispered. He's telling you I'm..." "He's telling me he knows where you are," Luca finished, his voice dangerously quiet. The man who had been vulnerable on the rooftop was gone. In his place was the boss, his face hardened, his eyes turning cold and flat. "He's tracing my protection to you." Back in the safe house, the air was thick. Maria paced. The image of the shoe burned into her mind. "This is my fault," she said, her voice shaking. "I brought this to you. I've put you in danger." "He put his hands on you," Luca said, his voice clipped. "Then he threatened what is mine." "I am not what is yours," she yelled, the sudden force surprising them both. "I am not a possession. I am not your territory. You are under my protection," he shot back. "In my world, that is the same thing." She stopped pacing. She looked at him, at the absolute certainty in his face. She resented the trail of threats that followed her, but a dark, undeniable part of her realized the depth of his resources. The police hadn't protected her. Sasha couldn't. This man could. She was wrestling with the moral cost of accepting help that required loyalty to a man capable of such profound violence. He made the call that afternoon. "Find the one who held the spray can. I want his name." The information came back in 2 hours. One of the ex's minor associates, a local man with a loud mouth. Luca told Maria they were going to the bakery. "Why?" she asked, her stomach twisting. "You're getting bread," he said. His tone left no room for argument. He wanted her to see. The bakery was warm, smelling of anise and yeast. The man was there, sitting at a small table, bragging to a friend. Luca and Nico entered. The cheerful chatter in the shop died instantly. Luca walked to the man's table. He didn't raise his voice. "You like painting?" he said. It was a statement. The man looked up, his face draining of color. Mr. Romano, I didn't mean no disrespect. You brought garbage to my street, Luca said. He looked at the counter, where Angelo's nephew was pulling a heavy, scalding metal tray of fresh ciabatta from the industrial oven. Nico grabbed the man's arm, twisting it, forcing his hand flat on the table, palm up. The man yelped. Luca picked up a pair of metal tongs. He didn't look at the man's face. He looked at his hand. You used this hand. He picked one of the steaming hot loaves off the tray and, with a quick, deliberate motion, pressed it firmly into the man's open palm. The man screamed, a wet, agonizing sound that was cut short. Luca dropped the bread. Tell your friend, he said, his voice a cold whisper, that he is not welcome in this city. Tell him the next time he sends a message, I will send one back in a box. They left. The neighborhood stared, silent. The baker, his hands shaking, quickly began mopping the floor. Maria was by the car. She'd seen it through the window. She was trembling, sickened, her romantic warmth from the rooftop cooling rapidly into a familiar, stark fear. This control, this casual brutality, it was the same force that had broken her. It was just pointed in a new direction. That night, the tension in the safe house was a physical thing. Maria was in her room, her small duffel bag open on the bed. She was packing the few things she had. Luca entered without knocking. Where are you going? I can't, she whispered, her back to him. I can't watch that. What you did, I am what I am, he said, his voice hard. I did it to protect you. That wasn't protection, she cried, spinning around. That was awful. I'm sick. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his composure. He looked almost lost. Is that what you saw? He took a step toward her. She flinched, a full-body recoil, her hands coming up to shield her face. Luca froze. The color drained from his face. The realization hit him. She saw the man in the bakery. She saw her ex, Maria. His voice was thick. He held up his hands, palms forward. Look at me. She lowered her arms, tears streaming down her face. I will never, he said, his voice raw with an emotion she couldn't name. Use these hands on you, ever. I swear it, on my mother's grave. The air crackled. The fear was still there, but now it was tangled with the memory of the rooftop, of his hand on her knee. He didn't move. He waited. She was the one who crossed the distance. It was a clumsy, urgent movement. She put her hands on his chest, her fingers gripping his shirt. I don't know who you are, she whispered. I know, he said. He kissed her. It wasn't soft like the rooftop. It was urgent, messy, full of the day's fear and violence. It was a desperate claim, but it wasn't violent. It was a plea. Stay, he whispered against her mouth. Please, stay. He led her to the bed. His hands, the same hands that had ordered the man's torment, were hesitant. He kissed her shoulders. He whispered reassurances against her neck. His fingers explored her arms, her waist, with a tenderness that felt clumsy, as if he was relearning how to touch. She met his kisses with a desperate need of her own. She needed to feel safe. She needed to overwrite the violence of the day. The scene was not about passion. It was about a clumsy, desperate need for emotional safety. It was about her expressions. Her eyes squeezed shut as she processed the touch, and his, intent and almost reverent. She was consenting not just to him, but to the idea that touch could be safe, even when it was this intense. Afterward, he pulled the blankets over them. He didn't leave. He held her. Maria rested her head on his chest, her ear pressed against his ribs. She listened to his heartbeat. It was steady, strong, and deeply dangerous. And for the first time in over a year, she slept through the entire night. She woke in the gray light of morning. She was alone in the bed, but the pillow next to her still held the indent of his head. The feelings flooded in. Safety, because she had slept. Shame, because she had slept with him. A deep, undeniable desire for him to return. And worry. She had slept with the man who had just maimed another man in public. She sat up. She realized she couldn't just be a passenger in this war. She couldn't let him fight for her, or she would become exactly what he'd called her, his territory. She had to decide whether to let him shield her with violence, or whether to take action herself. Maria got out of bed, pulled on her clothes, and went to the kitchen. She found a pen and a paper napkin. She sat at the table, the morning sun hitting her face, and began to draft a plan. Step 1. Get a new name. Step 2. Find a lawyer. She was done hiding. She was going to reclaim her life. Maria stopped hiding. She used the resources Luca offered, but the decisions were her own. The first step was erasing the woman who had been a victim. A quiet man in a suit, introduced only as Arthur, met her at the safe house. He was not a lawyer from a billboard. He specialized in disappearances. We will file for a new Social Security number, citing identity theft and domestic threat, he explained, his voice dry as paper. A new driver's license, a new name, if you wish. I want my name. Maria said, her voice steady, Maria Alvarez. I am not the one who should have to change. It was the first time she had pushed back on their assumptions. Luca, watching from the kitchen doorway, merely nodded, a flicker of approval in his dark eyes. She filed for a restraining order. It was a thick packet of paper that felt both powerful and useless. She listed the dates, the injuries, the threats. Luca provided a sworn affidavit from Sasha, who was now safely with her sister 3 states away, detailing the break-in. Maria started looking for work, not at a diner. She applied for a job at a small, independent bookstore, a place that smelled of paper and dust, worlds away from the clatter of plates and the smell of grease. Her body language shifted. She still flinched at loud noises, but she no longer walked with her shoulders hunched. She met Luca's gaze directly. She stopped apologizing for taking up space, but the ex was not a man to be deterred by paperwork. He escalated. First, he contested the restraining order. His lawyer, a shark in a cheap suit, filed a motion claiming Maria was unstable, a runaway, and had fallen in with known criminal elements, a clear reference to Luca. Then, the intimidation began. Maria got a call from her old boss at the diner. Maria, honey, you gotta tell your new friends to back off. Someone threw a brick through my front window last night. Red paint. All over the counter. Said it was a message for you. A few days later, Sasha called, her voice thin with terror. A man was waiting for me, outside my sister's place. He just stood there. He knew my name. He said to tell you that you can't hide behind the Italians forever. He said, what's his is his. The walls of the safe house, which had begun to feel like a sanctuary, now felt like the target. Luca, who had been giving her space, returned that night with a cold fury. He used your friend. He went after a civilian. What are you going to do? Maria asked, her stomach twisting. I am going to find the man who spoke to Sasha, Luca said, and I am going to find out who sent him. 2 nights later, Nico, Luca's lieutenant, arrived at the safe house well after midnight. Maria was in the kitchen, unable to sleep. Luca was at the table, a map of the city spread out under the dim light. Nico did not knock. He entered, holding a bloodied handkerchief to his own knuckles. He tossed a wallet and a phone onto the map. The one who spooked the friend, Nico said, his voice clipped. He's a freelancer. Mouthy. He was easy to find. Is he? Maria couldn't finish the question. He's in a basement, Nico said, dismissing her concern. He'll have a headache. But he talked. He pointed to the phone. He was hired by a man named Cairo, new player. Seems your ex found himself some new, ambitious allies. They're running product out of a warehouse in the district. Luca's face was cold, measured, like a judge studying a verdict. He picked up the phone, scrolling through the contacts. Cairo, I know the name. An amateur. He thinks he can make a move on my territory by using your past. He also gave me this, Nico said, pointing to a spot on the map. A stash house, where they keep the cash. Maria watched them. They spoke of basements and violence, of territories and stash houses, with the calm practicality of accountants discussing a ledger. She realized, with a cold sinking feeling, how thorough this network was. They had found the man who threatened Sasha in less than 48 hours. The choices they made were irreversible. They were not just protecting her, they were waging a war on her behalf. The next day, the tension was thick enough to cut. Luca looked at her, his face drawn. "We need to be seen," he said. "Seen? Where?" "Lunch at Romano's, in the front window." She understood immediately. It was a performance. "To show them you're not hiding me. To show them I'm yours. To show them you are protected," he corrected. But the distinction felt thin. They sat at table 4, by the large plate glass window facing the street. Everyone could see them, the baker, the butcher, the men who lingered on corners. Luca was a different man in public. He was relaxed, charming to the waitress, ordering wine for the table. But his small touches were territorial, a language meant for the street. His hand rested on the small of her back as he guided her to the table. When she reached for the salt, his fingers brushed her wrist, lingering for a beat too long. When the waitress poured her water, his eyes never left the woman's hands. They were small, possessive gestures, protective signals to his allies and clear warnings to his enemies. Maria felt like an animal on display, her gratitude tangled with resentment. She was safe, but she was a symbol. That night, the performance was over. The safe house was quiet. The weight of the day, of the public display and the violence simmering beneath it, settled on them. Maria found him in the small study, staring at the map. She came up behind him, placing her hands on his shoulders. She felt the tight knot of muscle beneath his shirt. He turned, his hands finding her waist. He didn't pull her closer. He just held her, his gaze searching her face. "This is not the life I would have chosen for you, Maria." "I know," she whispered. He lifted a hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, a touch so gentle it ached. "You are not an object, Kara. You are not a possession, but I will not let them have you." He leaned in, kissing the sensitive curve of her neck, just below her ear. His lips were warm, his breath ghosting over her skin. Maria's eyes drifted shut. She tilted her head, giving him access, her own reserved hunger stirring. This was real, not a performance. She reciprocated, her hands moving from his shoulders to his chest, then up to cup his face. She kissed him. Slowly, with an intent she hadn't felt before. It was a kiss of consent, of mutual comfort, a quiet acknowledgement of the brutal world they were navigating. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. A small, involuntary sound escaped her, not a sob, but a breathy, rusty approximation of a laugh. It had been so long since she had felt anything resembling joy. The sound broke the tension. Luca's eyes softened, a genuine smile touching his lips. "There you are," he murmured, and kissed her again, slow and ardent, a promise in the dark. A few days later, Maria knew she had to do something for herself. There was one piece of her past she'd left behind, a small silver key to her sister's house, hidden under a loose floorboard in her old apartment. It was a symbol, a connection to the only family she had left. She told Luca. He was silent for a full minute. "It's too dangerous," he said finally. "I'm not asking for permission," Maria said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm telling you, I need to do this. I need to know I can go back and face that place." He saw the resolve in her eyes. "You will not go alone. Nico will drive. I will be 2 blocks away. You have 5 minutes, no more." The drive back to her old neighborhood was suffocating. The buildings looked the same, but she was different. Nico parked in the alley. 5 minutes, he said, his hand resting on his jacket. She slipped into the building's service entrance. The apartment was empty. He hadn't been back. The air was stale, smelling of old wine and his cologne. Memories flooded back. The sound of the television, the specific creak of the floor when he was angry, the dread. She confronted the shame of why she stayed, the fear, the isolation, the hollow hope that he would change. She went to the bedroom, pried up the loose floorboard, and there it was, the small silver key. She was about to leave when she saw her sister's number written on a notepad by the phone. On impulse, she called, "Hello?" Her sister's voice was sharp, wary. Anna, it's me, Maria. Silence. Then, Maria. Oh God, are you okay? I heard. He came by. I told him I didn't know where you were. I'm safe. Anna, I am. I wanted to hear your voice. Why did you stay with him so long? Em? Her sister asked, the old argument rising. I told you. I know, Maria whispered, tears welling. I was scared. I'm sorry. Be safe, Maria. I can't be involved, but I'm glad you're out. Call me when you're free. Really free. The line clicked. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was conditional support. It was a start. She ran from the apartment, clutching the key, and didn't look back. That night, Luca presented her with the moral cost of her new life. Arthur, the lawyer, was with him. We have an opportunity, Luca said, his voice level. The man Nico spoke to, the one who threatened your friend. He's tied to Cairo, and Cairo is tied to one of your ex's associates, a man named Peterson, who manages his money. Arthur has found a way to link Peterson to fraud, Luca continued. But the case is weak. It needs a witness. Someone who can testify to the pattern of intimidation and financial control. Me, Maria said. It's a smear case, Arthur clarified. It would ruin Peterson. It would cut off your ex's money. It would legally unmake his network. Maria felt cold. But to do that, I'd have to testify. In public. They'd ask how I got this information. You would be admitting, publicly, that you are connected to me, Luca said. It will draw danger. It will paint a target on you, but it will also cripple him. She wrestled with it. She feared being seen as complicit in Luca's world, a tool in his war. But she also saw the chance. This wasn't just a restraining order. This was a way to actively dismantle the network that had protected him, the very system that allowed him to hurt her. Before she could answer, Luca moved on. The stash house, he said, turning to the map. Nico confirmed it. It's where Cairo and your ex's crew are meeting tonight. We're not waiting for them to make another move. We are ending this. Ending this? Maria asked, her voice trembling. We are cleaning the house, Luca said. He didn't want her to watch. She insisted. If this was the price of her safety, she would not hide from it. She sat in a car 3 blocks away, Sal at the wheel, the windows up. She saw nothing but the dark street. She heard nothing. That was the most terrifying part. Nico and 4 other men, dressed in black, had entered the building through a back roof access. 10 minutes passed. Maria counted every second. Then, 3 black vans pulled up to the building, silent as hearses. The men emerged. It was efficient. There was no gunfire, no sirens, just a quiet, brutal strike. Maria saw them carry 2 heavy bags from the building. She knew, with sickening certainty, that they were not full of cash. The vans drove away. Nico's car pulled up. Luca got out and walked to her. She was outside the car, leaning against the cold brick, her stomach twisting. She had just sanctioned this. Her safety, bought with that relief and revulsion warred inside her. She had a small cut on her knuckle from the floorboard. She hadn't even noticed it. Luca came to her. He saw the blood. He took her hand, his expression gentle, almost apologetic. He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and carefully, tenderly, cleaned the wound. It's over, he said. Is it? She whispered, looking at the dark alley where the vans had been. How many? They owed debts, he said, his voice flat. It was a payment. Graves prepared by those who owed him. He lifted her hand to his mouth and kissed the wound on her knuckle. He was gentle, devoted, and absolutely ruthless. They will never touch you again, he vowed. The next day, she met with Arthur. The raid had eliminated the immediate physical threat. Now, it was time to destroy the infrastructure. The testimony against Peterson, Arthur said. It's the final piece. It will put your ex in a legal box he can't escape. Maria looked at Luca, who stood by the window, his back to her. He was leaving the choice to her. She was no longer the woman hiding in the back of a delivery van. She was not the woman who flinched at a raised voice. She was a woman who had seen the cost of her safety and was willing to pay her share. She picked up the pen. I'll do it. she said. She signed the paperwork, her heart pounding against her taped ribs. She was agreeing to step into the light, to face him in court, to use the very system that had failed her. Luca came over and placed his hand over hers, clasping it like an anchor. The preparation for the testimony was its own kind of violence. Maria sat in a sterile conference room with Arthur, the paper-dry lawyer, and a counselor named Dr. Hayes, whose gentle voice felt abrasive against Maria's raw nerves. They rehearsed her testimony for 3 days. Miss Alvarez, please state for the record the nature of your relationship with Mr. Peterson. He was a friend of my ex-boyfriend. He handled his money. And did you witness Mr. Peterson engage in intimidation on your ex's behalf? Yes. Her voice was small. In what way? Reliving it was like swallowing glass. He was there when he... Maria's hands began to shake. He told me I was lucky. He said if I ever left, my ex had friends who could find me anywhere. He said he managed the accounts and that every dollar I'd ever earned was his, that I was his. Objection, Arthur said, playing the part of the defense. Hearsay. The witness is emotional. You must be calm. Doctor, Hayes instructed, her hands steepled. Just the facts. Do not give them your emotion. How can I not? Maria whispered, tears of frustration blurring the water glass on the table. Luca was never in the room. He sat outside, in the hard plastic chairs of the waiting area. He was a pillar of composed fury, a man of brutal action forced into a world of passive waiting. He read financial reports, his leg never bouncing, his focus absolute. But when the door opened and a clerk bustled past, his head would lift, his gaze a silent warning that kept the entire floor at a distance. Each time Maria emerged, pale and trembling. His eyes would meet hers. He'd nod, just once. You're okay. With each session, her voice grew steadier. The tremor in her hands lessened. She was taking the trauma, all the jagged, broken pieces of her past, and forging them into a weapon. By the 3rd day, when Arthur hit her with a hard question, she met his gaze. Yes, he threatened me. On 3 separate occasions, he said he would use his financial network to ruin my sister's credit if I reported the abuse. Her voice was cold, clear, and absolute. Arthur sat back, a small, satisfied smile on his thin lips. Good. You're ready. The night before the testimony, the safe house was silent. The air was thick with unspoken fear. Maria stood on the rooftop, looking at the city lights, the same skyline that had witnessed her lowest point and her first, fragile kiss with Luca. She heard his footsteps. He didn't speak, just came to stand beside her. What if he's there? She whispered. My ex, what if he comes? He won't, Luca said. He's a coward. He sends others. What if they don't believe me? What if I'm not enough? He turned her to face him. His hands were large and warm, cupping her shoulders. You are more than enough. You will tell the truth, and I will be there. His tenderness was a palpable thing. She was wearing a thin sweater, and he lifted his hand to her arm, his thumb tracing the small, pale arc of a scar on her forearm, a burn from a hot pan when she was 19. It was a mark he had come to know. I will keep you safe, he murmured, his voice a low vow. No matter what happens in that room, he will never touch you again. The intensity of the moment, the precipice they stood on, was too much. The fear and the gratitude, the bond forged in violence and quiet nights, all crested at once. She reached for him, her fingers tangling in the front of his shirt. He kissed her. It was not a gentle exploration. It was an urgent, reverent claiming. It was a kiss that said, you are here. You are alive. His mouth was firm, his hands moving from her shoulders to her back, pulling her flush against him. She answered with a desperate need of her own, her body trembling not with fear, but with a profound, aching need to be anchored. Their lovemaking was a language of whispered fears and fervent promises. His hands were everywhere, tracing the line of her ribs, his fingers entangling with hers, a grip that felt like a lifeline. He was reverent, his kisses soft against her throat, his breath catching. He laid her on the bed, his forehead resting on hers, their breath mingling. It was not about mechanics, it was about the healing his touch brought. A focused, intentional care that was designed to erase every brutal touch that had come before. He was promising her safety, not with his words, but with the careful, devoted map of his hands. The courtroom was cold, all polished wood and high ceilings, designed to make a person feel small. Peterson, her ex's associate, was at the defendant's table, smirking at his lawyer. Maria walked to the witness stand. Her legs felt like water. She saw Luca. He was sitting in the back row, a dark suit in a sea of beige. He wasn't looking at the judge or the lawyers. His eyes were locked on her, steady, awaiting. Her testimony began. Arthur led her through the facts. Her voice was small but clear. Then, the cross-examination. Peterson's lawyer, a man with a booming voice and cruel eyes, stood up. "Miss Alvarez, isn't it true you left your ex-boyfriend in the middle of the night, taking a significant amount of cash? It was $88. It was my tip money. And isn't it true you immediately fell in with a new man, a man with a reputation, a Mr. Luca Romano?" Maria's blood ran cold. A man who has provided you with housing, clothes, and, I assume, legal counsel? A man known for violence?" "Objection." Arthur was on his feet. "The witness is compromised," the lawyer boomed. "She's not a victim, she's an opportunist. She's lying about Mr. Peterson to protect her new benefactor. Isn't that right, Miss Alvarez? You'll say anything he tells you to." He was gaslighting her, twisting her escape into a crime. She faltered, the old shame washing over her. Her voice was gone. She looked down at her hands, trembling. Then she looked up. She found Luca's face in the crowd. He hadn't moved. His expression was not angry. It was just still. He was a pillar. He knew the truth. He had held her while she shook. He had kissed her scars. He was her anchor. She remembered the life she wanted. The bookstore. Her sister's voice. Her own name. Maria took a deep breath. She turned to the lawyer. "No," she said. The lawyer paused, surprised by the sudden strength in her voice. "No," Maria repeated, her voice raw and coherent. "I ran with $88 and a porcelain bird. I ran because I was afraid for my life. Mr. Peterson was there on May 4th. When my ex broke my ribs, he told me I deserved it. He was there on June 12th, when he locked me in the apartment. Mr. Peterson is the one who managed the accounts my ex stole my paychecks from. He's not just an associate, he's an enabler. He's the man who held me down while my ex hit me." The courtroom was silent. The smirk was gone from Peterson's face. Her testimony, raw and undeniable, had cracked open the entire circle of men who had enabled the abuse. That night, it was raining. They left the courthouse through a side exit, the victory feeling hollow and dangerous. Sal was bringing the car around the corner. Luca held a large black umbrella over Maria, his other hand at her back. A dark van, its headlights off, screeched onto the sidewalk, blocking their path. Two men jumped out. Luca's reaction was instantaneous. He shoved Maria behind him, against the brick wall. "Nico!" he yelled. But Nico and Sal were already moving, two shadows detaching from the car. It was a violent, close-quarters clash. Maria saw it in flashes. The rain made everything slick. She heard the wet thud of a fist connecting with a jaw, a grunt of pain. She saw one of the men raise a metal pipe. Nico moved inside the man's arc, a blur of motion. There was a sharp, sickening crack of bone. The pipe clattered to the pavement. The second man, the leader, lunged for Maria. Luca intercepted him. It was not a fight, it was an execution. Luca slammed the man against the wall, his forearm crushing the man's throat. The man's feet dangled. Luca didn't yell. His voice was a cold, lethal whisper, loud enough for only the man to hear. "You were at the court. You watched her. You thought you could touch her." The man gurgled, clawing at Luca's arm. "You tell him," Luca hissed, "that this is the only warning. You come near her again, and the next grave they dig will be yours." He dropped him. The man collapsed to the pavement, choking, the sound of distant sirens. "Boss, we go," Nico said, pulling Luca's arm. They were in the car and gone in seconds, leaving the two men broken on the wet pavement. graves left like markers in the criminal world, back at the safe house. The adrenaline faded. Maria stood in the middle of the living room, soaked and shaking, but it wasn't fear, it was a cold, profound rage. Luca was toweling his hair. "It's done. They won't be back." "Graves," she whispered. "What?" She rounded on him, her hands clenched. "That's your answer. More graves, more violence. You left them. You nearly killed him. They tried to ambush you," he said, his voice flat, as if explaining simple math. "And you enjoyed it," she screamed, tears of fury and revulsion streaming down her face. She shoved him, hard in the chest. "Was that for me, Luca? Or was that for your reputation? Did they disrespect you? Did they dare to touch your property on your territory?" She was trembling, the accusations hanging in the air. "Do you even value my life, or do you just value that I belong to you?" The question struck him. His composure, the absolute stillness that defined him, cracked. He looked stunned, and for the first time, Maria saw fear in his eyes. It was not fear for himself. They put their hands on you," he said, his voice thick, stumbling. "On the courthouse steps. They think they can take you from me." He looked down at his own hands, the hands that had just crushed a man's throat, the same hands that had traced her scars. "This world," he said, his voice raw, "this life. I'm afraid, Maria. I'm afraid that I'm the one destroying you. I'm afraid my world will be the thing that takes away your chance, any chance, of a normal life, the life you testified for." His confession broke her. The anger drained away, leaving only a deep, shared exhaustion. "We have to be different," she whispered, her hand still on his chest. "I can't live like this. I won't." He nodded, covering her hands with his own. "Okay, we use Arthur. More. We use the law, the way you did." He pulled her closer, his embrace desperate. "It will be slower. It will be harder. But, okay." She sensed the sincerity. It was a promise, a turning point. A man built on violence was offering to walk back his methods for her. Later that night, they made love. It was not the urgent, anchoring passion of the night before. This was marked by a quiet tenderness, a profound apology. His touches were careful, his kisses lingering, as if trying to repair the damage of the night. He was reaffirming his vow, not with violence, but with a gentle, reparative touch that promised a new, different kind of safety. The fragile peace lasted less than 12 hours. The next morning, Nico arrived. His face was granite. He didn't have to say anything. "What is it?" Luca asked, already standing. "The ambush," Nico said. "It wasn't just Peterson's crew. They knew our route. They knew which exit we'd use." "A leak," Luca said. It was not a question. Nico slid a small, burnt-out burner phone across the table. "We found this on the man you spoke to, the call log. The last call he received, 2 minutes before the attack, came from one of our own." Maria felt her stomach drop. "Who?" Nico looked at Luca, his expression pained. "It was Marco, the new driver, the kid Sal vouched for." A betrayal. From inside. The ambush wasn't just the ex. It was enabled by the very circle that was supposed to be protecting her. The trust that had been so hard-won fractured. Maria looked at Luca. The rot was inside his walls. The people who saved her were also the ones who had sold her out. The old, familiar impulse surged. Run. She had to decide. Could she stay in this protective orbit knowing it was compromised? Or was it, finally, time to leave again, to trust no one but herself? She watched Luca. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were filled with a deep, personal pain. He had been betrayed by his own. She thought of running. She thought of the $88 and the alley. She was not that person anymore. Running meant he won. Running meant they all won. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Luca looked up, his relief so profound it was almost a gasp. "But we do this differently," she continued, stepping forward. "No more secrets. No more decisions for me. We do this together. Honesty." "Honesty," he agreed, taking her hand. His grip was an oath. He's right, Nico said quietly. The betrayal. It means they're desperate, but it also means they see you as a pair. Luca nodded, his gaze fixed on Maria. Then it's time we stop hiding it. It's time we make our next move, together in public, where everyone can see. The part closed not on a kiss, but on a shared look of grim resolve. They were no longer a boss and his ward. They were partners, planning their first public move in a war they now had to fight from within. The public declaration was a performance of power. It was a charity dinner for the Apertura Community Clinic, hosted in the main dining room of Romano's. The room was packed with the neighborhood's elite, shop owners, local politicians, old men who had known Luca's father, and their wives, dressed in expensive silks. Maria wore a simple, deep blue dress. She felt the weight of 100 gazes. For weeks, she'd been a ghost, a rumor. Tonight, she was a statement. Luca's hand was a permanent, warm pressure at the small of her back. He introduced her, his voice low and proud. "This is Maria Alvarez." He didn't say, "The woman I am protecting." He didn't say, "The victim." His tone said, "My partner." The whispers stopped. The neighborhood, a living, breathing entity, recalibrated its understanding. After the main course, Luca stood. The room went silent. "We are here tonight," he said, his voice carrying easily, "to support the clinic, to support rebuilding. This neighborhood understands that safety is not passive. It must be built, and it must be defended." He looked directly at Maria. "Tonight, Romano's is making a donation of $50,000. A wave of polite applause. "It is made in the name of Maria Alvarez, who understands the cost of safety and the courage it takes to rebuild, better than anyone I have ever known." It was a coronation. It was a challenge. It placed a target squarely on her back, but as she met the eyes of the old men watching her, she felt a strange, cold calm. She was done hiding. The backlash was immediate. The ex's remaining allies, enraged by the publicness of the donation, saw it as a final, humiliating mockery. Her testimony had crippled their finances. This public debut was an act of dominance. They planned a catastrophic, desperate retaliation. The warning came not through Nico, but through Angelo, the baker. One of his young apprentices, a distant cousin of the man Luca had burned in the bakery, came to him shaking. He had overheard Cairo's remaining men, bitter and drunk, talking in a back alley. They weren't aiming for Luca's fortress. They were aiming for Maria's new, normal life. The bookstore. Luca took the call in his office. Maria saw his face go white. He didn't speak. He just moved. "Nico, the car, now the bookstore." They sped through the streets, arriving just as the lights in the shop were turning off. It was closing time. "Stay in the car," Luca ordered Maria. "Like hell I will," she said. "Already out." Nico, his eyes scanning the street, saw it first, a duffel bag tucked beside the entryway, wires barely visible. "Boss, we have a problem. Bomb." "Sal, get the street locked down." Luca barked. Just then, the front door of the bookstore opened. A young man, college-aged, was locking up. His name was Leo. Maria had spoken to him about poetry. "Leo!" Maria screamed. "Get back!" The boy looked up, confused, holding his keys. Sal, a big man, was already running. "Kid, move!" Sal tackled him, grabbing him by the shoulders, pulling him away from the door just as Nico fired 2 rounds from a handgun into the bag. The explosion was not a fireball. It was a deafening, concussive whump that blew the entire storefront into the street. Glass, wood, and thousands of pages of burning paper erupted outward. The shockwave knocked Maria off her feet, her ears ringing. Sal had shielded the boy with his own body, but they had been too close. Shrapnel from the doorframe had torn through the air. Maria got up, tasting copper. The street was chaos, and then she saw him, Leo. He was on the pavement, his eyes open, staring at the sky. Sal was beside him, pressing his hands to the boy's chest, but it was useless. Sal looked up at Luca, his face covered in soot and blood. "Boss, he's gone." Maria stared, a minor player, a boy who liked poetry, dead. The imagery of graves returned, the men from the stash house, the man on the courthouse steps. And now, This fresh mound, dug in the middle of her new life. This was the human cost of Luca's war. This was the price of her freedom. She turned to the alley, her stomach twisting, and was violently sick. In the days that followed, the shock hardened into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. Maria was shaken, but she was not broken. Luca had Sal and Nico handling the fallout, the police, the insurance. He tried to shield Maria. She walked into his office, her face pale but her eyes burning. "You will not handle this for me," she said. "Maria, you've been through enough." "His name was Leo," she said, her voice quiet but shaking with intensity. "He was 19. He is dead because they were aiming at me. This is not your war anymore. Luca, it is ours, and I will not hide while you clean up the bodies." She took an active role. She insisted. She went to Leo's family, not with Luca's envelope of cash, but with the raw, honest truth. She sat with his mother while the woman wept. She coordinated with Arthur, the lawyer, gathering witnesses from the street who had seen the attack. She helped counsel the other shop owners, her voice steadying their fear, channeling their anger. A memorial was held at the small church that housed the clinic. The room was packed, standing room only. Angelo was there. Sal, his arm in a sling, was there. The entire neighborhood, gripped by fear and anger, had come. At the end, Maria walked to the podium, Luca standing in the back pew, tensed. He hadn't known she was going to do this. Her voice, once small and repressed, filled the church. It didn't tremble. "My name is Maria Alvarez," she began, "and I am the person the men who did this were trying to kill. They killed Leo instead." She looked at Leo's mother. "I cannot tell you that his death had meaning. It was senseless. It was the result of a sickness, a violence that feeds on silence." She gripped the podium. "I lived in that silence for a long time. I was a victim of the men who do this. I hid. I flinched. I prayed to be invisible. But invisibility is not safety. Silence is not safety. What happened on that sidewalk is what happens when we let fear rule our streets." Her voice rose, gaining power. "I will not be silent anymore. I will not hide, and I'm asking you not to. This neighborhood belongs to us. We will rebuild the bookstore. We will honor Leo, and we will not be afraid." She finished. The church was utterly silent. Then, slowly, Angelo stood up and began to clap. Then Sal, then the entire room. Luca watched her, a profound admiration in his eyes. This was not the broken woman he had found in the alley. This was a force. His desire to protect her was now eclipsed by a fierce, burning pride. His partner. That evening, after the last of the mourners had left, they met in the small, private garden behind Romano's. It was their sanctuary. Maria had been helping plant a small memorial tree by the clinic. Her hands were caked in soil, the dirt black beneath her fingernails. She was scrubbing them at a cold outdoor spigot. Her shoulders slumped. Luca came up behind her. He didn't say anything. He gently took her hands, turned off the water, and led her to a bench. He returned from the kitchen with a bowl of hot water and a clean linen cloth. He knelt in front of her. He submerged her hands in the warm water, and with slow, patient, meticulous care, he began to wash the dirt from her skin. He cleaned beneath each nail. He washed the soil from her palms. It was a baptism. He was washing the grave dirt from her hands, his touch a silent promise. When he was done, he dried them with the cloth. He held her hands, his thumbs stroking the backs of her knuckles. "What you did today," he said, his voice thick. "It was the bravest thing I have ever seen." She looked at him, her eyes heavy with the day's grief. "It doesn't bring him back." "Luca." "No," he said. "But it changes what happens next." He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. They stayed like that for a long time, just breathing. He kissed her, a soft, restorative brush of lips, a kiss between two people who knew pain, who were exhausted by the cost, and who were still choosing each other. His hands lingered, cradling her face. "I promise to keep you safe," he whispered. "I've been doing it with violence. I've been answering graves with graves. It's not working. It just spreads." He took her clean hand. "I promise you, Maria, From now on, we build alternatives. What you said in that church? We build it so strong they can't tear it down. We protect by building, not by killing." She looked at his hand, the hand that had ordered so much, now offering a new vow. She interlaced her fingers with his. "Okay," she whispered. The first test of that promise came 2 days later. The leak. Marco. The driver who had betrayed their location at the courthouse. Nico brought him to Luca's office. 2 of Luca's oldest lieutenants, men who had run with his father, were there. They represented the old way. "He's a rat," Luca, one of them, Silvio, said, his voice like gravel. "He sold you out. He sold her out. The boy from the bookstore? That blood is on his hands. It's a bullet. Simple." Marco was shaking, weeping. "They had my brother. They said they'd hurt him. I'm sorry, Mr. Romano. I'm sorry." Luca looked at the boy. He saw the terror. He saw the weakness. He looked at Maria, who was standing by the door, watching. Her expression was clear. No more graves. Luca turned to Silvio. "No," he said. The room went cold. "What?" Silvio said. "He is exiled," Luca announced. "Nico will drive him to the state line. His family is protected, but he leaves tonight. If he ever returns, he's fair game. We don't make another grave for a scared boy who was leveraged." Silvio's face turned purple. "This is weakness. She has made you weak. Luca, this is not our way. This is not your father's way." "My father is dead," Luca said, his voice like ice. "And his way is what put that boy in the ground. This is my way. The choice is made." Silvio stared at Maria with pure hatred, then turned and stormed from the room. The other lieutenant following him. The old guard was angry. The foundation of his power was fractured. Maria walked to Luca's side. She put her hand on his arm. He had chosen her. He had chosen the new way. Even at the cost of his own allies, the final move came from the ex. He was cornered. His allies were dead or in hiding. His money was gone. He was revealed to be a pawn, backed by a regional crime figure who had been using him to test Luca's defenses. This figure didn't want blood. He wanted leverage. He arranged a trap. The message came through Maria's sister, Anna. He has pictures of my kids. Your ex. He wants to meet. He said he'll trade their safety, my safety, for one conversation. He wants to meet you at a hotel downtown." Maria told Luca. His first instinct was violence. His second, the new one, was strategy. "It's a trap," Luca said. "He's not alone. This isn't about Anna. It's about you. They want to get you in that room, force you to confess on tape that I coerced your testimony. They want to destroy your credibility, undo the legal case." "What do we do?" Maria asked. "He wants to use a confession," Luca said, his eyes hardening. "We'll give him one, just not the one he's expecting. Arthur is contacting a journalist. We're going to that meeting, but we're not going in for a fight. We're going in for exposure." The night before the confrontation was the quietest they had ever known. The safe house felt small, the city outside waiting. They stood in the bedroom, the weight of the next day pressing down on them. "I'm scared," Maria whispered, her voice raw. "I am terrified," Luca confessed, turning her to face him. He put his hands on her arms. "Not of them, of failing you, of this new way not being enough. It has to be," she said. He pulled her close. Their lovemaking that night was not about passion, but about emotional surrender. It was tender, long, and almost painful in its honesty. He spoke aloud his fears of his world consuming her. She spoke aloud her apology for bringing this war to his door. His hands were a form of worship. He traced the maps of her scars, the old, faded white lines from her ex, the new, puckered skin from the floorboard. His kisses were reverent, vows to remember her pain, to honor her endurance. He was memorizing her. Maria relaxed into his touch in a way she never had before. She let herself be wanted, completely, without shame or fear. Her own hands, no longer caked in dirt, explored his shoulders, his chest, learning his strength as a comfort, not a threat. Their physical closeness was a mirror of their emotional bond. There were no secrets left. In the gray light of dawn, they stood at the window. They were no longer the boss and the victim. They were two people, matured by grief and violence, steeling themselves to face the final confrontation. They were different, they were more alike, and they were ready. The final confrontation was not a clash of steel, it was a game of light. Luca. Arthur and Maria orchestrated the exposure with the precision of a diamond cutter. The ex wanted a meeting at a hotel downtown, a neutral, public space. He promised Maria's sister, Anna, would be safe if Maria just came and confessed. He believed he was setting a trap. He was walking into one. Arthur had fed the entire file: Peterson's conviction, the ex's history of violence, the failed ambush, the bookstore bombing, to a respected investigative journalist named Sarah Jensen. She, in turn, had brought it to the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force, who were already building a case against the regional figure backing the ex. When Maria walked into that hotel room, she was wearing a wire. The ex was there, flanked by two men who did not look like they were from the neighborhood. They were hired muscle, expensive and detached. "Maria, you look good," the ex said, his old charm acidic. "We just need to clear this up. You're going to sit down and you're going to tell this camera." He pointed to a small device on the table. "That Luca Romano forced you to lie, that he coached your testimony." "And if I don't?" Maria asked, her voice steady. "Then Anna's children have a very bad day." He smiled. Maria sat down. She looked into the camera. "My name is Maria Alvarez." "I was coerced," the ex prompted. "I was coerced," Maria repeated. "For 2 years. By you. On May 4th, you cracked 2 of my ribs. On June 12th, you locked me in the apartment for 3 days. You sent men to threaten my friends. You had a bomb planted at a bookstore, which killed a 19-year-old boy named Leo." The ex's face went white. "That's not... You partnered with men who traffic narcotics. You used their violence to protect you. But you're not a boss. You're just a bully. And you're done." The ex lunged, his hand raised, the old, familiar motion. The door to the adjoining suite burst open. It wasn't Luca. It wasn't Nico. It was 4 FBI agents in tactical vests. "Hands in the air, now!" The 2 hired muscles froze. The ex looked at Maria, his face a mask of complete, utter ruin. Sarah Jensen, the journalist, was right behind the agents, a photographer capturing the moment the ex was forced to his knees. It was exposure, not vengeance. A coordinated sweep began across the city, targeting the regional figure's entire network. But the new way was still messy. The sweep was not clean. The regional boss, in his own moment of desperation, had anticipated the betrayal. He had files of his own. As the FBI hit his warehouses, he leaked evidence to the local police, evidence of Luca's operations. The police, eager to clean house, moved on Luca's assets. They hit the shipping routes. They raided the back rooms of Silvio's operations. The old guard lieutenant who had already felt betrayed by Luca's new methods. It was a bloodbath of arrests. Luca's infrastructure, the one that had protected Maria, was being dismantled from the outside and the inside. Sal, Luca's loyal driver, the man who had pulled Maria from the alley, was caught in the middle. He was moving Luca's car to a safe location when he was cornered by Silvio's angry, cornered men, who blamed Luca for the raids. The police arrived at the same time. In the confusion, in the crossfire of police sirens and the old guard's desperate, final act of violence, Sal was hit. He died on the pavement, a loyal friend paying the price for a war he had not started, but had faithfully served. The funeral was a quiet, heartbreaking affair. It was not a grand Mafia spectacle, but a somber Catholic service in the rain. Maria stood at the fresh grave afterward, watching the dirt being shoveled onto the simple wooden casket. Luca stood 20 feet away, isolated, his dark suit soaked. He had lost his driver, his friend, and a piece of his past. Maria walked over to him, her shoes sinking into the mud. She looked at the fresh mound of earth. "This is the cost," she whispered, her voice hollow. "This is the price of safety. Leo, and now Sal. He pulled me out of the alley. Luca, he was kind." She wasn't accusing him. She was reckoning. "We wanted to do this with exposure, not blood," she continued, her voice breaking. "But the graves they just keep coming. They're still your answer." "This was not my choice," Luca said, his voice raw. This was their war. This was Silvio's. "It doesn't matter," she said, finally looking at him. "It's the world you built. It's the price of the life you led, and Sal just paid it." It was a heartbreaking, honest scene, underlining the true, irreversible stakes of their life. The final legal victory felt almost hollow. Maria testified one last time. At the ex's trial, he was a shell, his network gone, his backers indicted. She walked to the stand, not as a victim, but as a witness, a survivor. The defense lawyer, a public defender, tried the same tactic. "Miss Alvarez, you were living with a known crime figure." Maria held up her hand, stopping him. "I was living with a man who protected me. My life is complicated, it is messy, and it is not on trial." "What is on trial?" she said, turning to her ex, her voice even, her chin lifted. "Is the violence of this man, his actions, his threats, his choices. He is a coward and an abuser, and his time is over." Her transformation was complete. She was steady, clear, and powerful. The ex was found guilty, his public standing destroyed, his network in ashes. That night, Luca faced his own reckoning, but it wasn't with his fists. It was in his office, with Arthur and 2 federal prosecutors. "You're dismantling my empire," Luca said, his voice flat. "Your cooperation is required." The prosecutor said. Luca looked at the map on his wall, the map of his territory, his life. He thought of Sal's grave. He thought of Maria's speech at the church. Silvio's operations, the shipping containers, the offshore accounts. Luca said, his voice quiet. "I'll give you all of it. I will dismantle it myself. In exchange, my people, the ones who just run the restaurants, the bakers, the drivers who are left, they go clean, full immunity, and the community clinic, the shelters. They are not to be touched. They are legitimate." It was a painful unmaking of power. He was trading his crown, not for his life, but for the lives of his people, and for a chance at the one thing he'd never had, peace. It was a redeeming intent, born of profound loss. When he returned to the safe house, Maria was waiting. The house felt empty, hollowed out. "It's done," he said. "What's done?" "The empire. I'm giving it to them." She stared at him, seeing not the boss, but the man who had lost everything. "I can't live this life, Luca," she whispered. "The final reckoning. I told you, no more graves, Sal. Sal was the last one. I will not be protected at the cost of more bloodshed. I need a life, a real one, where we trade, where you trade retribution for rebuilding." "I don't know how," he said, his voice breaking. It was the first time she had seen him truly weep. He wasn't crying for his lost power. He was crying for Sal, for the violence he couldn't stop. "It's the only way I've ever known." "Then learn," she said, stepping forward, her hands coming up to his face. "Learn with me, or I can't stay." He argued, he wept, he held her, and then finally, he surrendered. He embraced her, his body shaking. "Okay, no more retribution, only rebuilding. I promise you, I promise." His kisses were an apology. Her kisses were a promise. Their fingers pressed to each other's faces, as if memorizing the lines of this new, fragile treaty. They were promising to learn a new way to keep each other safe. Reconstruction began. Luca, true to his word, funded rehabilitation programs for victims of domestic violence. Signing the checks with a steady hand, he pledged the safe house itself, the gray cage that had saved her, to become a community shelter. Run by the Apertura Clinic, he began quietly, legally, divesting from his dangerous operations, pouring the money back into the neighborhood. Maria partnered with local advocates. Her voice, once raised in grief at a memorial, was now a force for change. She helped establish a 24-hour hotline. She secured legal aid funding. She spoke publicly, sharing survivors' stories. Their romance, once forged in fear and protection, now had a shared, quiet purpose. There was one final test, an isolated, vengeful ally of Silvio's, a man who had lost everything in Luca's deal, saw Maria walking home from the clinic one evening. He had a knife. He followed her into the alley. He grabbed her arm. "This is for Silvio, for the old way." Maria didn't scream, but she didn't have to. Angelo, the baker, was cleaning his windows. He saw the scuffle. "Hey," he yelled, grabbing a heavy bread peel. "You get away from her!" A woman at the fruit stand, the same one whose child had hidden from Luca, saw Angelo running. She picked up her phone and dialed the number now plastered on the clinic window, the hotline, the man, seeing he was not in the shadows, seeing a baker with a weapon and a neighborhood that was no longer afraid, shoved Maria and fled. The attempt failed, not because of Luca's violence, but because of community vigilance. The new structures, the ones Maria and Luca had helped build, had held, months later. Spring, the city felt new. Maria moved into a small, bright apartment 2 blocks from the clinic. It was paid for by the joint legal settlement funds from the lawsuit against her ex's estate. It was hers. Luca visited. He was no longer in his severe black suits. He wore jeans, a dark sweater. He was no longer a kingmaker, but a man in a simpler, intentional life. He managed the restaurants. He sat on the clinic's board. They walked hand in hand through the Saturday market. The neighborhood no longer feared him. They nodded. Angelo gave him a loaf of bread, clapping him on the shoulder. Luca exchanged a private, easy smile with Maria. He bought her a pear, and she laughed, a sound that was now easy and frequent. That night, in her apartment, they made love. It was gentle, patient, and grounding. There was no desperation, no fear. It was described in the simple, profound language of touch, his hand in her hair, her fingers tracing the laugh lines around his eyes. It was quiet laughter and mutual, uncomplicated regard. It was peace. The final image, dusk. Maria stood at the small memorial in the community garden, a simple stone plaque for Leo and for Sal. Her ex's graves, and the graves Luca had made, were a silent, cold reminder in her memory, a testament to how far she had come, the terrible cost of revenge, and the slow, painful possibility of healing. Luca stood behind her. His hands came to rest at her waist. His presence was a promise, not a threat. She leaned back against his chest, his chin resting on her hair. He pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her temple. They were imperfect. They were scarred, but they were chosen. They turned from the memorial, hand in hand, and walked toward a future where protection meant empowerment and where they would continue to rebuild together. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so drop a comment and say hello. For more stories like this, be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories, and please share your thoughts on Luca and Maria's journey in English. We read everyone.